get up and dash 100 meters and I would eat up the competition. It's just non-existent. I kick my feet up. Thought I was fast until I got blasted.
Welcome to the 3 Count Library. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about MOX, the autobiography of Jon Moxley, written by Jon Moxley. So this was a very interesting book. I really liked it. I liked it mostly. My number one thing what I liked about this book is that it was clearly written by Jon Moxley, because you can read this book in his voice. Like, I heard his voice in my head as I read this. I've heard his voice enough that every time he dropped any type of word or slang or whatever, I could just see it coming out of Jon Moxley. So I'm almost certain there was no ghostwriter for this. So this book was a fun read. There's obviously some things about it that I don't really care for. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think it was mostly a good book. And I think that if you were to read this, you would really get a great deep dive into the psychology of Jon Moxley, or as he is as a person. I try not to use real names on this channel. But you get to learn who Jonathan Good really is. You know, what his motivations are, what he thinks about the business, what he thinks about all the different places that he's been, all the situations that he's been in. He kind of gives you a lot of that stuff. And on top of that, there's still some extras. I had a feeling that when I started reading the book, I was like, well, this guy's not that old. He's not 40 yet. So what can he really be talking about, really? Like, I know he's been all around the world and all that kind of stuff. And then you see there's a lot of fluff in this book. And that's the stuff that I really didn't like. Is that he spent an entire chapter talking about sandwiches, about how to make the best sandwich. Now, it's funny as hell. It's a hilarious book, and I could tell you that part I found particularly funny, that he spent an entire chapter talking about the best way to make sandwiches. He also spent several smaller chapters talking about his favorite movies, favorite songs, favorite albums, favorite wrestling matches, that kind of stuff. So if you're really, really, really a hardcore fan of Jon Moxley, you're really going to love this book. Me, as somebody who was more interested in the wrestling part, I thought it was a good book. I didn't think it was the best book possible, though. You know, I do have a feeling that, you know, there's obviously a lot of things that we would have liked for him to talk about. And I think he touched on most of the big issues. Now, before I got my hands on the book, I really did see all the floating around the stuff about WWE and Kevin Dunn and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to limit the amount of time I spend on that stuff. Maybe because I consider, if you listen to his promos or listen to his interviews that he's done about WWE, you know what he has to say about that subject. But there's still a lot of stuff to get out of this book other than the anti-WWE stuff. And I walked away from this thinking that this is a really good dude, you know. I was already a fan of Jon Moxley, but I've been very critical of his work since he came to AEW, mainly because of how people have hyped him up. It was similar to CM Punk, where he was so hyped. He was super hyped up. And then you kind of get the raw version of him in AEW. You're just kind of like, that's it. You know, like, it's okay. Then there's been some flashes of brilliance here and there. So I've been very critical of his on-screen character, but I've always kind of liked the guy that was underneath all of the... I was a big fan of Dean Ambrose, too, even though I wasn't a fan of a lot of the same stuff that everybody else wasn't a fan of, like Mitch the Potted Plant, the Little Red Wagon, and a lot of other dumb stuff that they were doing with him. Things, Acme products exploding in his face, all that kind of other silly stuff. I wasn't a fan of any of that crap either. But I think there was a natural charisma and frenzy to the Dean Ambrose character that it still exists in Jon Moxley. It's just a little bit different, you know, and I really enjoy his work. But I've also been very critical of his work too, especially his strikes, especially his knee strikes. They are not good. But we're going to talk about, as usual, when it comes to the library, we're going to pick 3 subjects that we're going to discuss. And the 3 subjects we're going to discuss are his thoughts on wrestling, how he got into the business, and WWE, FCW, and AEW, which, you know, that's it. We're not going to talk a lot about CZW, mainly because he didn't talk a lot about it. But I want to leave you guys with something that you need to go read the book for yourself. And I think like that, those are kind of like the deep cuts. Him talking about his relationship to sandwiches, his relationship with Renee, of course, is detailed in the book. that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into any of that stuff, because I wanted it to be at least something for you guys to go and read for yourself. So the interesting thing I found here was that it was written in non-linear style. In other words, the book is not written in, "Hi, my name is such and such. I was born in such and such." It jumps right into a certain story, and then you jump back and forth between years. So you may jump back to when he was in ZZW, and then you may pull forward to, him talking about leaving WWE and how tired he is of that. So in doing this summary, I have to rearrange things, I have to create columns in order for it to make more sense. So let's get into the first thing, which is his thoughts on wrestling. During the introduction, I found this to be some of the best stuff. This made me really want to get the book. As he talked about what wrestling is, and he says it's hard to quantify wrestling. And he says that wrestling can be anything. It's world-class athletes, it's Broadway, it's Shakespeare, it's a summer blockbuster, it's a best-selling novel, it's soap opera, it's high art. So it seems that he, like so many other people, have a very difficult time of telling you what professional wrestling really is. And him being a creative, he kind of sees that pro wrestling is all these little things, and that it can be all of these little things. And I'm glad this was in the introduction, because as somebody who is, as you go through the book, you see all of this stuff that he's talking about. You see the part where he's been a part of the big summer blockbusters like WrestleMania. He's been part of some of the Shakespearean storytelling type of thing. He's been a part of the comedy aspects with the Little Red Wagon and Mitch the Potted Plant and that kind of stuff. But he's also been a lot of part about the world-class athletes. He's been a part of the soap opera aspects of it. He's been a part of a lot of the sleaze, the violence. He's been a part of a lot of that stuff. But to him, all of it is what wrestling is. The interesting thing that he said in here is that he was taught, don't pace yourself. Go until you fall over. We'll tell you when to stop, which apparently was something he learned in training. And you can juxtaposition this to later in the book where he talks about Vince and Triple H telling him to tone it down. And this is something that he found to be very annoying in his time in WWE. This is why he said he felt like he was wearing a straitjacket. And he said that every time that he really felt like he was doing something that was awesome or something that was really good, usually on house shows, Vince or Triple H or somebody would come around and tell him, tone it down. You don't have to do that much. You can, and they took exceptional interest on keeping him on the straight and narrow. And they even talked about it. Triple H making a comment like he don't want Dean Ambrose to come across as too much like Terry Funk, spinning around in a circle and falling down like Homer Simpson. And then he says that he listened to what he was saying, but he said, thinking about it now, Terry Funk rules, fuck Triple H, And he said like, if you're an aspiring wrestler watching and you're reading this book, then, don't tone it down for anyone. Anybody who tells you to tone it down probably doesn't have any charisma. So he's telling you straight up, go a mile a minute, go balls to the wall. And there is some truth to that. You have to go find yourself. But I think that he learned a little bit that doing too much, because especially since later in the book, he's talking about how beat up he is, how many matches he worked in 2015. He was the workhorse for the company for a long time. And it was kind of saying like, now you see why they're, it's like he didn't put two and two together. Like they're telling you to tone it down and to chill out because you're working all of these matches in 2015. And so he was, burned out by 2016, 2017. By the time he even won the title, he was burned out. And, that philosophy of you got to keep going, you got to keep pushing, it's good, and it sounds good on paper. But once you really get, they're running those house show loops, and he discussed the WWF house show loop schedule in here. He says like, there's 3 non-televised shows, 3 house shows, 1 televised show. And he was like, thinking about it that way, 75% of what you do is not seen by other people. It's only seen by the people that are in the audience. So again, he didn't put it all together that because you're out here trying to bang every house show, they're saying you don't need to do all of this. It's just a house show. Nobody's like, there's no television camera. Sure, you want to give the fans something, but you don't want to go out there and beat yourself up every single night. You can't do that. And he seemed to didn't put all that together. What I found remarkable in this book was his respect for discipline and his personal character. I found those two things to be very good. For instance, he talked a lot about how much he loves Japan, and he talked about the how much he loved the young boy system, the young lion system in New Japan, the discipline and the intensity that they bring to their work, and that there is no frills with the young lion system. It's all passion, it's all intensity, it's all psychology. And when he said when he wanted to go to Japan, that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to be an old young lion. He wanted to not to show them that he's not a WWE washout that's in over his head. That he really wants to go out there and bring the same passion, the same intensity that he had been watching them do. The young lions. That's why he picked up Shota Umino. Is he wanted to pick somebody to bring along with him and to kind of reward them for all of the hard work they've been doing. And I really thought that was very cool. I thought that was very awesome. That he's not really looking at the main event guys. He's watching the young lions. He's watching the new guys that are coming in and seeing the system push these guys to the limit. That they're going back to what I was talking about, not pacing yourself. The young lions are out there getting it. And they usually do. Now, they spend most of the time getting beat up. I mean, they do. It's just part of their gimmick. But they really do show you how to fire up the very basics, the bare bones of what wrestling is. You do learn it from the young lions. And so this was very interesting that he really was excited by that concept. And that's really what made him come to Japan, was the challenge of working in Japan, because he had never really done it before, and wanting to reignite the passion that was within him for this business. Which I think another nice little thing here is when he talked about his time in ZZW, which was about 2009. And he said that he didn't really care about being a good worker. And that, it definitely conflicted with his Les Thatcher training. That, Les Thatcher really pushed cardio and being a good worker. And when he was in ZZW, he said, I really didn't care about that stuff. I just wanted to be ballsy, and I wanted to be creative. And I wanted to do dangerous matches in a different way. But he, of course, learned later on that, as being a damn near a drug addict and a drunk and being beat up and broke, it wasn't really quite working out. But he really enjoyed being in the ring. And oftentimes that was the difference you would see, like, in the storytelling, the way that he put the book together. He would talk about waking up not knowing where he is. Maybe there's some girl there. Maybe there's a drink involved. Maybe there's some drugs involved. And then he would feel like shit. He would shit talk himself. He would be beat up about it. Then he would get in the ring. And as soon as he starts getting hit and he starts hitting some of the other people back and the energy from the crowd is coming in, everything is good. No matter what happened, everything was good once he got in the ring. Until 2018. That was kind of his breaking point because he wasn't having fun in any fashion. But he was okay until he got into the ring. So that was very interesting to learn too. And that's something I've heard with wrestlers quite a bit, is that, the match is mine. The promos, who goes over, who doesn't. Don't concern myself with that because the match is mine. When I go out there, that's my time to do what I want to do, to make my connection with the audience. And that's really what pushed him. So I found that to be very interesting as well. And so the final thing that I think is probably the most important thing is near the end of the book, he talked about, WWE. He talked about it throughout the book, but the last piece here is that he talked about, Vince McMahon doesn't own WWE. He is like, he had this theory that Vince McMahon was trying to run the company into the ground so that when he was gone, nobody else could run it. Which I think is funny because so many other people have said that. But he said he realizes that Vince doesn't own WWE. And that, when he's gone, Triple H and Stephanie won't own it. Shane won't own it. Nobody can own it. And he says because wrestling doesn't belong to the promoters. It doesn't belong to the wrestlers. It belongs to the fans. And he says that no matter how bad WWE gets, he grew up on it. He was a fan of it. He watched it his entire life. No matter how bad it is now or how bad it can get, it does not tarnish his memories of what it was, which is what made him want to be a wrestler. And I found that to be very insightful, because I do see a lot of people who are, embittered, jaded wrestling fans, myself included sometimes. And you kind of wonder, like, why the hell am I even watching this shit? And then you go back and you watch something that was even mildly good. And you're kind of like, man, that's why I watch this shit. And then you may see something that might be mildly good on one of these weekly television shows, and you might be like, that's why I watch wrestling. Even if it's like a pile of shit dropped on you all the time, there's always going to be those nuggets of goodness there, or those nuggets of, that's why I watch this stuff. This is what this wrestling business is about. And of course, as a kid, you don't know that they're dumping miles and miles of garbage on you all the time. Like this specific spot here really made me think, because I sat down and I said to myself, when I was a kid, there was a lot of stupid gimmicks when I was a kid. And I was saying to myself, because I'm really a big fan of the new generation era. And I said to myself, a lot of that stuff is stupid. A lot of it is stupid. A lot of the stuff that we remember fondly is really fucking dumb. The Big Boss Man is stupid. The Mountie is stupid. The Berserker was a guy pretending to be Bruiser Brody. It was stupid. Man, like, everybody remembers Mantar and Bastion Booger and all that stuff. Yeah, it's stupid. Nails, stupid. Doink the Clown, stupid. Crush, stupid. Atom Bomb, stupid as fuck. But amongst all of that horse shit was Bret Hart winning the King of the Ring, having 4 different kinds of matches in one night, killing it. It was Razor Ramon, oozing machismo, being a very interesting, engaging character. He was fun. It was the rise of Shawn Michaels, a guy who was, incredible on the work rate, great charisma, changing the game for smaller guys, in so much that he was actually going out there working heavyweights. In WCW, they wasn't even allowing him to do that. In WCW, you can do the same thing. There's a lot of terrible stuff in WCW, but you still, amongst all that horrible shit, you'll have Ric Flair. You'll have the Steamboat Steve Austin matches. You'll have the Dusty Rhodes Steve Austin matches. You'll have Sting and Cactus Jack, Sting and Vader. You'll have all that stuff, but you got to kick the ding-dongs with it. You got to deal with the horse shit that comes with it. A lot of the really bad stuff that we all hate about wrestling today. A lot of that shit existed when we were kids too. But we weren't 30 some odd years old and remembering it fondly. Like I try to tell people all the time, that's why I hate the Attitude Era so much. It's because people really lionize it, but when you take a couple of steps back, Naked Midian in general was awful. Viscera, awful. The corporate ministry wasn't all that good. There was a lot of guys who were absolutely the shits, who got over on either on charisma or because the crowd just cheered for everybody who came out of the shoot. Like Too Cool, for instance. Like if Too Cool was to work today, people would hate it. They'd say it was stupid. Some people would even say it's cultural appropriation or racism. But in 1998, nobody gave a shit. It was fun. Nobody cared. And it just tells you that his mentality on it is kind of the same mentality that you should probably adopt as a jaded, embittered wrestling fan. That you probably should just accept that if it's not for you anymore, that's perfectly fine. But the business doesn't really belong to Vince. Vince is just a guy who writes the checks and, he hires and fires guys, but he's not going to be there forever. And there was a business before Vince got there. There'll be a business afterwards. The business without him is going to be a very interesting look, but there was a business before him and there's going to be a business after him. And it's going to be the same for everybody, Tony Khan and everyone else. Everything continues on. It's all about how you feel about the business. What memories do you carry to your children about the business? Because for everybody who starts talking about the mega powers exploding, you have to remember there was a lot of goofy shit going on around the same time. They did a wedding at a pay-per-view, the match made in heaven and the match made in hell. And people today don't talk about how silly that is. Because wrestling weddings are, people are tired of that kind of stuff now. But back then it was a fresh idea to do a wrestling wedding. Or if it wasn't fresh, it wasn't done that many times. So it's something that really made me think. And I really was not expecting to go into a Jon Moxley book and see something that was really going to make me consider my position on what he on the business. So I learned a lot from Jon Moxley. His personal philosophies are also really good. He says a lot about the lesson he learned from his dad about we're the good guys. That's my favorite line. And he explains it early in the book by saying, if your life was a movie, are you doing the kind of things that the good guys would do, or are you doing the kind of things that the bad guys would do? And he says that, no matter what, his dad told him, we're the good guys. We always do what the good guys would do in the movie. And that makes sense, especially when we talk later about the development of the Jon Moxley persona. And he talked about, him wanting to be an exceptionally vicious character, but he always ended up being a babyface. And again, he's not. Sometimes people don't really organize their own thoughts, and because this book is written in a way where he's jumping back and forth, he didn't realize that Jon Moxley can be as vicious as he wants to be. He can be as tough, but there's going to be certain things that are just babyface qualities, And Jon Moxley is, I say he's the Bruce Willis of WWE. I call him I John, or not even WWE anymore, but like the Bruce Willis of AEW. Or if you watch Die Hard, he's just a guy running around in a building barefoot in a tank top. Explosions are all over the place. Bad guys are all over the place. He's not necessarily the most qualified guy to be in this position, but he's the only guy there, and he's going to do the right thing. And that's kind of how I've always taken the Jon Moxley character, and that's why he's always a babyface. So that's that's pretty cool. All right, so let's talk about him getting into the business. All right, so Jon Moxley got into the business. Well, he first was introduced to pro wrestling through his childhood friends. He tells a story that, he went over to a friend's house and his friends had all of these action figures, Demolition and Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and stuff like that. He didn't know who those guys were. And then he was introduced to pro wrestling. Then from there, he found Brian Pillman, who was a wrestler in WCW, and he started watching WCW. So that's how he kind of got into the business. He's from Cincinnati. Brian Pillman's from Cincinnati. He's a poor kid from, a really rundown neighborhood. He called himself a Piccadilly kid. And he really didn't have much of anything. And he decided to really kind of, his spark for wrestling had kind of been ignited. So he decided to go to a wrestling show. And the first wrestler he ever saw live was Johnny the Bull, the guy from WCW. So he was kind of enamored with him. And he found out that he was at Heartland Wrestling Association, which is run by Les Thatcher. And when he turned 17, I think he was a little bit away from being 18, he sent letters to Les Thatcher, a physical letter to Les Thatcher, because he wanted to become a wrestler. And then he hopped in his car and drove to the Main Event Pro Wrestling camp in Cincinnati. And despite the fact that he was only 17 and he was supposed to be 18, and despite the fact that he did not have the $2,500 necessary to start training, he showed up anyway. And that's kind of how he became training with Cody Hawk in Heartland Wrestling Association. And that he basically fell in love with the business by, going to these flea market shows. And to double back to his thoughts on wrestling, this is kind of where his thoughts on what the business should be began to sort of form. So as usual, when you're in training, he was helping break the rings down and put the ring up for every show. And he talked about how Heartland used to be a developmental for WCW and WWE, which of course is true, and how they used to have WCW rings. They still had those rings, and they still had the skirts and stuff like that, ring skirts, and how he felt, a certain way being in a WWE ring while, it was a former developmental territory. It was no longer a developmental territory by the time he got there. But he didn't know that it had been, so he didn't know that he was really in a WWE ring until he was sort of told. And that they traveled with the WCW rings and all that kind of stuff. So to 2003, 2004, he's training. He's really trying to get good. He's the shits because he's pretty new, but he meets all of the guys who are coming through Heartland at the time. They're helping him get booked in other places. In 2006, he starts. He goes to Puerto Rico, and in Puerto Rico, he's told to be vicious. The guys want him to be vicious there. He want him to be a vicious American heel, or whatever. And that's where he picks up what he would later, become the Jon Moxley character. Is that that viciousness that becomes his thing. And he, of course, wrestles the independents, bouncing back and forth for the next 3 years until he stumbles across CZW. And that's where he starts getting the CZW bug and going to work there. And he said he never wanted to be a deathmatch wrestler. That was, of course, not the style he was trained with. He just wanted to do dangerous matches and do them in a way that makes sense. And because deathmatch wrestling was creative. And he spent a little bit of time talking about it and talking about the personal challenges like wrestling in a tournament of death and how he took that as a personal challenge in order to do that. When he was posed with the question of being in a tournament of death, he really didn't want to do it, had no really intentions on doing it. But the way that it was put, he felt like he would be a bitch if he didn't take it. Well, that's kind of another recurring theme, is that people would bring something to him, and he would feel like it's a personal challenge. The G1 is another one that he said it was kind of like this, that he really hadn't asked to be in the G1, but it was kind of pitched to him. And he kind of thought about it like, man, me in the G1, I get exposed. I'm a WWE guy. Why would they want me to be in here and to make me look bad or whatever? But then he would take it as a personal challenge and be like, fuck you, I can do this. I'm going to go ahead and show all these guys that I can do this tournament of death or do this G1. And I love that. I love that go get 'em, that attitude where, there's that moment of, I don't know if this is smart because it's not really who I am, but what I know I'm not is a quitter, not somebody who's going to run from that challenge and jumping in there and doing it. So I thought all of that was very interesting. Of course, the ZZW stuff was what most people ended up knowing him for, and he did that for a while before he was signed to FCW. So Jon Moxley's road to sort of the big time starts with him working for Gabe Sapolsky. Gabe Sapolsky, of course, as we should know, was the sort of the protege to Paul Heyman. And he was working with Ring of Honor. He was also starting up Evolve, and he was doing Dragon Gate USA. And Dragon Gate USA is where Jon Moxley met Gabe Sapolsky. And Gabe Sapolsky has a bit of a reputation for advocating for some of his guys and pitching guys to the WWE developmental. Of course, that was the only option that he had at the time. So once he had worked for Dragon Gate a little bit, he had it just kind of envisioned. He kind of envisioned it. He started talking about it, and this is another thing that I didn't know about him. He's a pretty spiritual guy. And, not religious, but spiritual. And so much that he also talks about how he kind of sees things and then they happen. He's talked about working for Dragon Gate, and then one day he's just kind of like, I'm going to be in WWE. And he was like, if you don't believe me, fuck you. But I just was, after having a conversation with Gabe and how all of that stuff was going, I just believed I would be in WWE. And then he said a year or so later, they called him to go to FCW. So he got called to go to FCW in about May of 2011. He had been suggested by Joey Mercury. And Joey Mercury was sort of the mentor of the Jon Moxley at the time. And from there, he ended up getting the name Dean Ambrose. The name came from Dusty Rhodes, who got the name from James Dean, which I did not put that together. I literally didn't put that together at the time. I don't think I've ever heard the story of how he got the name Dean Ambrose. But, of course, he didn't like the name. But he got it from Dusty, so he didn't want to argue with Dusty. But he liked the idea of James Dean. So that's kind of where he started with the initial concept of the character. And you could tell, like, with the jackets and everything. And he said he wasn't there long because FCW is designed as a developmental program. It's designed for people who have no wrestling experience. If I remember correctly, I think Seth Rollins basically said the same thing. that FCW was designed for the football players and the basketball players and all of those people who have no athletic, who have an athletic background but have no wrestling experience. He thought promo class was stupid. This is another, Jon Moxley thing. Promo class is dumb. Everything is stupid. This is a stupid program. I don't want to be in here. I don't need to be here. So then him and Foley decided to shoot their own angle. And it was run by Triple H, but they decided to shoot their own angle. This is where he came up with the Foley Moxley thing. This was in 2012. So he had only been in developmental for about 6 months when he decided to basically shoot his own angle with Foley. And the plan was for that to be his call up, that he would get into this feud with Mick Foley, and this would lead to his call up. And the idea was, of course, that Foley had ruined an entire generation of wrestlers with his hardcore deathmatch garbage. And it was the Moxley generation that had been ruined by Foley, and he needed to be held accountable for what he had done. So the entire feud was going to be a trial of Mick Foley before they really can have the match. And of course, they do all of the Twitter stuff and all the, probably all the stuff you guys already know. Before what ended up killing the angle, of course, was Mick Foley couldn't pass a physical. So they ended up dropping the angle, and he ended up in FCW even longer. And he said by this point in time, since he was stuck because his out was ruined by WWE doctors, Seth Rollins had also become sort of anti-authority because he was down there having problems with The Office. He didn't say it, but it was Terry Taylor that Seth Rollins was having problems with. And he had become anti-authority as well. So the two of them kind of melded on that idea that they were becoming very, very anti-authority in FCW, and they were sort of being the problem children. And Seth was really close to getting kicked out, and everything was going wrong down there. And then they kind of got the idea for the Shield. The Shield was pitched to them. Roman, Seth, Dean, and Big E were invited to Hell in a Cell, and they were told something was going to happen. Next thing you know, Big E was dropped from the program. Then Moxley, of course, tells the story how he and Roman became friends, because him and Seth had already been in FCW for a while, but he became friends with Roman because he knew Roman's brother Rosie. Rosie had worked in Heartland Wrestling Association when Dean Ambrose was there training. So he had worked with Roman's brother. So that kind of made them friends, where they kind of knew each other. And of course, then the Shield was pitched to them. And the original concept of the Shield had riot gear. First of all, they had the Boss Man stuff with the flak jackets and everything, but they also had riot shields. They were supposed to have shields. And he says in the book, like, if we had been forced to use those shields, somebody would have tripped over it coming through the crowd. It most definitely would have been me. I would have pitched the bitch. You wouldn't be reading this book right now because I probably would have gotten fired. But what got the Shield idea, the actual physical shields that they were supposed to carry to the ring, what got that idea killed is Vince McMahon saw them messing around with the shields. And he was like, if you're supposed to be such big, bad, tough guys, what do you need those for? And then Ambrose was like, fuck yeah, we don't need these. And they tossed them, and they didn't need the shields anymore. So he talked about how cool the Shield idea was, and, that they didn't get any long-term plan. They were basically told little by little, hey, you guys are going to be the backup for CM Punk. When he goes, you guys go, yada, yada, yada. But it was a play-by-ear kind of thing. It wasn't a long, planned-out story. Then they got over like gangbusters, and they put them on their own track where they didn't have to follow CM Punk around and all that kind of stuff. So from there, things get a little bit interesting, of course, as we sort of learn how he didn't go through the Shield breakup and everything. He didn't really go into any real detail about that. But it was very cool how he said basically the Shield was us. We came up with a lot of the things for the Shield. It wasn't a lot of stuff from the booking offices or anything like that. It was just kind of us doing our thing, and it was our baby. And so that led to his big singles push when he won the United States Championship. I think this was 2013 when he won the United States title. And he says, give me my fucking belt. He says it on television to the referee. But the cameras pick it up. This, of course, leads to his heat with Kevin Dunn, which I said I'm not going to get too far into. But this is where we get, of course, WWE being full of shit. And this is something that is always left out when people clip out this part of the book and post it online. He says that WWE didn't bother him too much until this point. At this point, he said he felt that whatever Kevin Dunn was telling people in these production meetings about him changed his entire outlook. That everybody started talking to him differently. He started being approached differently. Everything changed when he got into it with Kevin Dunn. And he gave Kevin Dunn that apology. But then Michael Hayes would come to him and say, that apology is not good enough for the push we want to give you. So that push is dangled over his head. Like, you need to apologize. You need to really grovel to Kevin Dunn, or we're going to snatch away this push. And he said, like, hey, I apologized. And he kind of explained the situation. Like, if Kevin Dunn would have just told me, hey, we're fucking pissed off at you, then he would have been a little bit more sincere. But because he was led to think a simple, my bad, I didn't mean to put y'all in that situation, was good enough that, he felt like Kevin Dunn stabbed him in the back. So that's why he's like, fuck Kevin Dunn. And I agree, fuck Kevin Dunn. You don't hold that shit over somebody's head that long, man. It was an accident. And plus, he didn't say it into the microphone or anything like that. If the camera guys picked it up, too bad. Sucks for you, man. But he didn't say it loud enough for any microphones to pick it up. He just mouthed the words. In any event, that kind of would... And I remember vividly him being United States champion and being pushed in the closet. I remember him being United States champion for a really long time, but never defending the title and never really being on TV. And it makes sense when you look back on it now, why he was kind of kept off screen. Because, he was dealing with the heat that he was getting from backstage. Of course, it didn't stop him forever. He ended up being a WWE champion. So, he talked about that too. And he says that when the Money in the Bank, when he won the title and won the Money in the Bank and everything, is that he says that, he would love to give WWE credit for this incredible 2-year story that they had sat down and crafted. But he said it was all a complete and total accident. That, Roman was going to have to do a 30-day suspension for steroids or whatever it is. He had got popped for wellness. And Seth was was going to take the title from Roman. And they just needed somebody for Seth to fight. And Dean Ambrose was the best choice for that. And that they were doing, he put rehearsal in quotation marks, that they were doing, quote, rehearsals for Money in the Bank. And Chris Jericho was leading the rehearsal because, of course, he's the one who came up with the idea. And I think he was in that match. So Jericho basically told Vince, I'm not doing rehearsal. We're not doing it until you tell me who's winning this match. Because Vince wanted to keep under wraps who was going to win the match. And which he loves to do. He loves to not tell the talent what's going on. So Jericho squeezed from Vince that Dean Ambrose was winning. Then Jericho told Ambrose that he was going to win. And so Ambrose knew he was going to win, but he didn't tell anybody because Roman was pissed that he was going to have to lose the title. And he was grumbling about the Money in the Bank thing. And he says that, whatever his angle is, it got something to do with the Money in the Bank. And he was like, we don't know who's going to win, but whoever's the Money in the Bank is probably going to end up being the champion at the end of the night. And Roman was not happy about that. And he knew the whole time that he was going to be the guy who was going to win. But they didn't actually out this until later. So Roman goes into the production meetings. He gets told the whole entire layout. He comes back to Seth and Dean says, all right, I'm putting Seth over clean, and Dean's going to cash in. And then Roman was, of course, in a better mood once he finds out that it was going to be Dean, the one who was going to have the title at the end. So that was all very cool, to see how all of that was put together. Because especially consider it put the spotlight on all three of them, and it kind of pushed Roman out of the way for a little while. And Dean, of course, being the champion. He didn't talk a lot about being the champion. He just said it was something he envisioned when he was 12 years old. And of course, as a lot of wrestlers tend to do, he was made fun of for people, him, especially being a broke, poor kid from the middle of nowhere in Cincinnati, thought he could be the champion of the world or whatever. And he was like, basically, it was a big fuck you to everybody who thought I couldn't do it. And like, fuck you, I can. Fuck you, I did. But he didn't talk about his title run that much. But he did talk about, everybody, him winning the Money in the Bank, and and I felt like this was very interesting too. And I like this when he talked about the fans had been burned so many times with him, because he told the story that he had gotten really close several times to being the champion. And he talked about one of his favorite matches, or maybe even his favorite WWE match, was his match with Triple H at Roadblock. And he said he loved that match because it was kind of like this hybrid of a house show pay-per-view, where it wasn't as loud or as bright as WrestleMania, but it wasn't as dim and dark as a pay-per-view or a house show. And he felt like it was the perfect thing. And then he wanted to test himself against Triple H, because and he has this thing where he rambles in the book, where he talks about he heard a lot so much about Triple H and how great he is, but he probably just booked himself to be the champion and all this bullshit, and that Triple H was full of shit, and he had all these problems with him in FCW when he ran the developmental and all this kind of stuff. And then he said that it became like the moment of truth, where they had to sit down and talk about this match, and he didn't know what Triple H was going to say to him about this match. He figured like, hey, he's gonna either script something out completely, or we were going to call it in the ring. And he says that, calling it in the ring is stupid, but that's what he prefers to do. And so he says it was like a game of chicken, where he didn't want to go to Triple H and see what Triple H wanted to do. And Triple H wasn't coming to him to see what he wanted to do. So Triple H, I think, sent Michael Hayes to get him, to bring him to Triple H. And he says Triple H is signing autographs, and he's signing autographs. And they're standing right next to each other signing autographs. And Triple H is kind of like, what you want to do? And Dean's like, well, I don't know what you want to do. And they kind of going back and forth without, being macho and silly about this match, when they both could have just said, all right, fuck it, let's call it in the ring. Triple H is just kind of like, all right, he talked about the finish, and that was it. And they went out there and did it. And then at the end, he put Triple H over. He even put him over in the book too, saying that that Triple H kid can actually work. And he of course thanked them for putting him on that pedestal. But jumping it back to the Money in the Bank, he talked about how they had gotten really close with him. Survivor Series. He didn't talk about Survivor Series, but I know he was very close at Survivor Series 2015 when he was in the finals of the tournament and he got beat by Roman. 2016 Royal Rumble, he was the last guy eliminated by Triple H. Then Roadblock 2016, when he wrestled Triple H for the title in the main event. So he was talking about how, he kept getting close. He kept getting it yanked away. So the fans didn't really believe in him, he felt, when he finally won the Money in the Bank. Everybody was like, yay, but he'll probably lose it because the company doesn't like him, yada, yada, yada. But when he finally won the title, he was like, it felt like everybody orgasmed at the same time. And I thought that was fucking cool. That was pretty badass, man. That was dope. And it made me, go back and watch those moments all over again. And that's kind of what a book should do. It should make you want to go watch these things all over again. So by 2018, things have changed. His relationship with Vince McMahon is deteriorating. Vince is now micromanaging his character, micromanaging his personality, everything he says. He says, Vince is writing my scripts personally. Vince is not letting me have any fun whatsoever. They're not giving me a promo, a match, nothing. They're completely straitjacketing him at this point. I don't know why. It was never mentioned why he was getting this treatment, but only that him and Vince were not getting along at this time, and that he felt like he was being smothered, and he decided he had to get out. And he said that the promo, obviously we already know the promo with Roman and the gas mask and all that kind of stuff, was when he decided he had to go. And of course the internet finds out that he's not going to resign, which he says he didn't tell anybody. It was just a thing that got out there. And he says immediately as soon as that got out there, Rocky Romero sent him a text message telling him, hey, New Japan would love to have you. And then he started getting text messages from like then afterwards I think he said he called Chris Jericho to ask him about, how was it working in New Japan. And then they spent an hour, dragging WWE. And from there he learned about Tony Khan and AEW. And that's, of course, he ends up signing with AEW and Double or Nothing being in Las Vegas and all that kind of stuff, which he swears was not planned and is just happenstance, and how he felt, finally getting out of, the WWE system, and saying to himself that he was very self-conscious about it because he had spent almost 10 years in WWE, that the entire wrestling business had changed since he was in WWE, and he didn't know where he would fit. So it was just a coincidence that he just happened to be a free agent the same year AEW was starting. And he said that he wanted AEW to be the Paradigm Shift. That's why he changed his name of his move to the Paradigm Shift. Because he said that it came from Triple H. That when Triple H and the Shield were standing on the stage at one point, and he said Triple H asked them, "Do you guys know what a Paradigm Shift is?" And then he was like, he's talking to us like we're fucking kids. Like, of course we know what Paradigm Shifts are. And then he says that he wanted the Shield to be the Paradigm Shift. He wanted these guys to represent what was going to change about WWE. And that was Triple H's plan. That was his vision for the Shield. And he said when he left AEW and joined them, he felt like he had achieved that paradigm shift. So you mean that leaves me as the person who is reading the book to ask the question, maybe he had finally achieved that paradigm shift, that changing the WWE from the outside, is actually possible now through competition. Through outside pressure, they might be able to make WWE get some concessions out of them from the fans' perspective, maybe. And I think that's very poetic. That's a very poetic spot to end on here, because I really enjoyed the book for his voice and his storytelling. Even though it's non-linear and it's very all over the place, it's still very coherent. And it's still in his own voice, so you can feel what he's saying, and I believe what he's saying. He's an authentic dude. He doesn't hold back on the drugs and the alcohol that he was doing. He's talking about snorting cocaine in Puerto Rico and snorting Klonopins and popping pain pills and all that kind of stuff. He was very transparent, and I believe him. I believe that he is a good dude at the end of the day. And this book is ruled. It's a good wrestling book. There's there's still some problems there. Like I said, he spent an entire chapter talking about sandwiches and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie. But that's just kind of, extra stuff where if you're a super fan and you want to know what his favorite color and his favorite movies and stuff are, then that stuff will add to it. But for a guy like me, all I cared about was the wrestling, and he really delivered with that stuff. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. Donate to the channel. Thank you guys for your time, and I will talk to you guys later.